Thanks for the word. I just shared my screen. Thanks, Richard and the organizers. Yeah, my name is Erdem. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Donkey Republic. I'm sitting in Copenhagen. We are a European bike and e-bike sharing company. I just added some slides to give some of our perspective or my perspective about why there's such an interesting discussion between the different business models that Natalia mentioned, that Paris is on one hand having 20,000 heavily publicly financed bike share that they are so happy about, but when free float or other bike shares come, then they want to charge them fees. And that seems a little bit at least interesting, that on one hand you want to pay a lot of money for a service, and on the other hand you want to charge them fees to operate more or less the same service. So I think there are some forces here that I want to kind of say, why is there a strong public opinion on the topic, and basically how one could also look into it. So I'll try to go through this in 15 minutes, if that's okay, Richard. Yeah, good. Yeah. Okay, so I think I want to start with saying this is the what new mobility is for a lot of people. We've seen Uber coming along and basically the tech statement on what will be future of mobility. Everyone will have a private driver. And this is important because it added to congestion, and it added to some kind of issues with labor markets. And it brought up the question whether we can rely on tech companies bringing sort of public benefit. And I think that's a little bit behind the mistrust behind scooter companies, potentially our company. Every company that is sort of a tech company and bringing like the next best thing has created or stirred some issues that are potentially, here to stay and need some regulatory involvement. So I think that is on our side to basically, first of all, say we have a credibility problem when we talk about solving social issues as tech companies. And that, I think, is at a time when the last few years, when we look at Google and we look at Amazon and we look at Facebook more critically. So I think that's a little bit in the back of people's minds also about this question. So Uber has bought a bike share system, Jump, and then they've now passed it on to Lime with a deal that they could buy back Lime. And Lime is actually probably the largest still micromobility company. So Lime has a deal where Uber can buy them back. And Bolt is also running bike shares and scooter shares, or actually scooter shares, and Lyft has purchased bike shares. But that's not their main business. Their main business is actually ride hailing. And they are really interested in having potentially transferring actually customers from these light mobility vehicles to heavier mobility vehicles. Uber is also saying they would like to be the mass platform of the future. And if you look at it with that lens, who will control what vehicles people take when they go from A to B? They'll have one app and they'll be looking at, what are the options and who will regulate that platform. So I think if you look at a bit of the long-term game involved, then we do need to think about the actors that have to do with want to acquire potentially customers with light mobility vehicles, but they don't necessarily want to promote micromobility in the long term for the sake of public benefit. They are here to make money. So all of that actually is, I don't think as a company, CEO and co-founder, I don't think we can bank on companies unregulated can be good for society and planet. Even the best of these like scooter, bike share company, if you are part of a platform that mainly does car sharing, or ride hailing or selling cars, then you can expect that they will potentially sell more ride hailing than bicycles. So there needs to be a good balance about regulators feeling empowered and going into the topic. And therefore, really good that we have this discussion with ITF and then people like yourselves involved. So I'd like to think that my company bets on a well-regulated future. I think it's a bet, because our bet basically says we will do things right, but that comes at a cost of not satisfying riders to the maximum. For instance, we are only operating through virtual stations, not free float, because we have noticed that there's an issue for the cities and citizens who are not using the service, and that comes at a cost to them if you don't park the vehicles in bike racks. So we require use of certain bike racks, which is virtual stations, and that comes at a little bit of cost of rider satisfaction. And we are betting that regulators will act and require some kind of parking regulations, and that bet is sort of turning out right, but we do need a good regulation. That's just one example. Okay, so just briefly about Danke also, we're about 15,000 bikes and e-bikes, about 50 cities in Europe, of which 15 are larger cities and 9 million trips and almost 1 million riders and so on. So you have an idea of the company. We looked into what are the interesting parameters that people talk about when we look into sort of the external factors, if you should prefer a bike to a car, to a scooter, to a bus and rail and so on. And not all these factors are well studied, but these factors we've heard are brought up in different studies or different public servants as public issues. So congestion affects public space that you take, the safety, the health benefits, emissions, labor market affects affordability for everyone, or having access to mobility for everyone, and other resource depletion. It's probably not a complete list, but just starting the discussion, like this is a list that we could come up with. Then we wanted to get rigorous about our public footprint, or at least Danke bike share or bike sharing in general. And then we looked into these effects that we could find some numbers on: congestion, safety, health, and emissions, based on what was available, and also potentially we saw most interest in these dimensions. We were able to put together some studies that were able and really focused on sort of making an assessment of bike shares, potentially scooters, and other modes of transport. And I think it's good to note these studies for health effects. We used DTU, which is Danish Technical University, and COBE, engineering company. They made a study in Danish, but the link here is actually works. So when I share the presentation, you're welcome to look into that study, or you can just copy paste the title on Google. Eurostat, that's a European study, Handbook of External Costs of Transport, to assess the air pollution. And the DTU COBE study is about physical activity. For accidents, actually, they also assessed that for bicycles, the DTU COBE study in Denmark. And then there was a statement from the Ministry of Transport in Denmark about the rate of accidents of scooters compared to bikes, which they found to be 7 times higher than bikes. And I'm happy to also share the link for that statement. Then there's the climate change assessment, which was fantastic. Assessment from OECD, I think it came last year, environmental performance, only looking at the greenhouse gas emissions and not other kind of resource depletion, but that's a really great start. And in terms of congestion effects, we could also use the Eurostat report in terms of time delay costs different vehicles create. These reports are available publicly, but I don't think companies or cities have the sort of data available to them to be able to say to their budget departments or economic group that if we incentivize another bike trip, we're actually going to gain so much from health benefits and so much from the reduction in congestion, which probably come back in terms of more tax and on salaries and so on, because people gain time. So when we put the numbers together, we could find the Eurostat effects of different vehicle types. So again, on congestion, the main effects are on cars and electric cars, which is 35 cents per kilometer cost added in urban and semi-urban areas to society for each kilometer. Health effects, bikes and e-bikes have a positive effect, just like walking, because of the moderate exercise. E-scooters, on the other hand, don't have the active mobility part, which is a shame. And also they have a pretty high accident rate. So bikes actually have the same moderate activity as walking, but they have also a 20 cent per kilometer cost of accidents. With scooters, it's the 7 times the rate. So that gives them a €1.40 cost per kilometer to society due to accidents, concussions, and related health issues. The health benefits are mainly linked to The moderate activity reduces chronic diseases and certain types of cancer. And then that has the effects on people not going early retirement, fewer days of hospitalization, and so on. So these are very tangible benefits, but they might not occur to the specific city where this person is using the bike. And that's potentially an issue for public authorities to think holistically about their budgets and be able to, let's say, incentivize bikes because they'll earn that money from another pocket. Then you have the greenhouse gas effects, which is looking at the full life cycle of the vehicle, and then per kilometer, what are the vehicles emitting. Then we hired Dresden University. They have a bike expertise department for studying cycling. And they did a replacement study, basically for each bike trip on donkey in Copenhagen, what are we replacing instead? And we were able to collect through our app quite significant number of people reporting after each trip what they would have taken instead. And we would very much like to work with cities doing this more. And it's a relatively light touch thing to do. And we're happy to also engage institutions like Dresden University to be able to, for you to measure, okay, this scooter, what vehicles did they replace? In Copenhagen or in Paris, there was some speculation that they are replacing mainly people walking. Tourists are using scooters in terms of walking. At the same time, a lot of scooter companies, I think, correctly say it's fantastic if scooters are saving CO2 emissions because people are not using their cars. If that's the case, that's fantastic. We should just measure it, and it's easy to measure. So how do we do that? You hire an institution like Dresden University, and they will have a survey where after each trip, the riders are reporting, what would I have used if I didn't use this vehicle? So based on that, we were able to say that we replaced 7% car trips, 30% bus trips, 20% rail trips, 5% e-scooter trips, 14% private bike trips, and 24% walking trips. That is the summary of basically our footprint analysis and what we were able to put together. I have more slides to give you some other thoughts and ideas. I think I have a few more minutes here. I just highlighted a couple of things on the health benefits here, so that's really important. So if you just, one other way of looking at it is if you take these percentages that we replace and look at the other vehicles' costs and what we have replaced them as costs. So average donkey trip or average bike trip for that matter is gaining society about 2.5 euros in health benefits only, and about 13 cents on congestion savings. So close to 3 euros actually. And then you have also greenhouse gas savings. You can also convert them to euros if you like. And average trip length is here 3 kilometers. And then we were actually told by Dresden University that we've been conservative because the average bike trip, that what takes a bike for 3 kilometers in average takes longer for a car, like 5 kilometers, because they have to do detours and so on. Anyhow, a bike trip is saving society about 3 euros. That's a huge figure. And we heard that figure also being brought up by some of the European Commission figures. So this figure is known by different civil servants or being brought up, but we don't see it translate to policy or favorable conditions for bike shares or subsidies for bike shares and so on. So I'll come to similar figures. And of course, if you were replacing a car trip, then we are getting 4 euros in health benefits and 1 euro from congestion. So like 5.5 euros per trip if we replace a car trip. But we're not replacing just car trips. We're replacing a mix of different trips. And therefore, we're only getting something like 2.5, 3 euros so public benefit. So I think it's really important to understand the externalities of each of the mobility vehicles, what percentage modality they have, and replacement of each one of them. So if you take away the taxi, if you take away the car share, if you take away the bike share, what are people using instead? Because that's what you're going to get, and that's what you don't want. Okay, I think this is a big and sort of texty slide, but so how do you use that information in terms of regulation and procurement? I put procurement next to regulation because a lot of the discussion about e-scooters is about how do we kick them out or how do we regulate them? How do we sort of let them play? But actually, if if bikes are creating such great public benefits, which we think they do, that's why cities are paying for them greatly, as Natalia has mentioned. Actually, I have also just a slide on that. So yeah, so here we have the traditional bike share model, the Velib system in Paris, and a VC-backed business. The largest one of them is Lime. Some typical things is that the Velib systems and they are driven by public procurement. The public has a very high level of control in everything, on vehicle, on how the system works, on the brand, on the pricing, where they can be parked, how the operation should work, everything. It's a bespoke system and it doesn't scale without more public contracts. If you look at the VC-backed businesses, it's a standard system focused on scaling fast. Sometimes some of the players see regulation as interference, and the sustainability of business model is questionable, as a lot of players got out of business. They can change their prices. They might do one city one day and another one another day. But I think we need to have regulations and procurement policies merging these two business models. Natalia, this is like my beg to you and other colleagues. We can't have highly subsidized and free bike shares on one hand, and then other bike shares trying to compete on next to them, because that's not a market which can work for all. You need to have one or the other. And it's of course fine if you say we go with the traditional model and we don't want competition, and that can be just fine. That's the choice, of course. But I think the future will be something more like this list is sort of a bunch of considerations, but a subsidy model where there is subsidies if the vehicle mode is bringing value. So if you think scooters are bringing value, if there is low amount of accidents, and if they are replacing cars, then I think I brought you some of the figures, some of the metrics. There should be value for replacing cars with scooters. Therefore, it should be the case that you allow them and maybe even subsidize them. And because of the health benefits, especially, bikes really deserve to get subsidized, as they are right now. Number of operators, you can choose some competition. It's probably beneficial for larger cities, like Paris, and then some of these controls that we see cities doing, even if they don't subsidize. For instance, controlling prices. Yes, you can operate here, but you cannot charge more than X amount. Or controlling on coverage. Yes, you can operate, but you also have to cover this and that area. Can be difficult or tricky for us to estimate whether we'll have a lot of vandalism in a certain neighborhood. Then we'll have to pull out of there. If not, if we are asked by the public authorities to operate in an area with a high level of vandalism, then we need subsidies. So it's really a balance. And if you want us to operate a business and be there, then of course we have to have a viable business model. So the current contracts where cities are paying for something, they tend to have focus on outputs and high level of control. And we hope that we can have more focus on and permits on outcomes. We would like that we are subsidized or getting some benefits, especially focus on trips, not on having vehicles on the street, but actually having trips. You can even subsidize them in certain times and locations. You can say in this neighborhood at this time. And we heard an example from UK. They are awarding bike trips, shared bike trips in rush hours and certain neighborhoods where they have traffic problems. It's very smart. Then the bike share operators have the incentive to move the bikes there and to market the bike sharing service to the citizens there. So just create the right incentives, and then the operators will do the job. I think that's all from me, and I probably went over time. So thanks thanks for that.